Hello, my name is Marta Kajzer-Wietrzny and I work at the Faculty of English at Adama Mickiewicza University. And today I will tell you how we use language when we juggle more than one. Now, there were probably a couple of situations in your life when you have seen and heard that the language that you see and hear is used in a slightly different way than normal. That might have been the case when you heard somebody speaking your language, your native tongue, but it wasn't a native tongue for them. So they were speaking a foreign language. They probably were using all the words that you know, but they were using them differently. It can also happen when you participate in a great meeting at a conference, for instance, that you can listen to interpreters giving their voice to the people who can't speak everyone's language. And they use also their language a little bit differently. You can spot it by pauses in different places that you would expect them to be, because the interpreter is waiting for the message to come, or different prosody. But also it turns out that the way the interpreters use words is also different. And finally, probably you have been in a situation when you read a text and you can see that it doesn't read so natural. So there were some awkward phrasings and that you probably wouldn't use on your own. And maybe it came to you that maybe it's a translation. So today we are going to talk about distinctive cases of language use, such as foreign language use, or interpretees, or translationees. Now, in theory, we all have a similar word repertoire at our disposal. But do we speak the same language? We are all using the same words, trying to adhere to the same linguistic conventions. But the way we use language is conditioned by a number of factors. So the use of language is context dependent. You will use language differently when you speak to a little child, or when you go to a doctor, or when you present at an exam, or in an official situation. We also use language differently when we speak and when we write. And we also have our own favorite different words that we use differently than other people. And we sometimes order words differently than somebody else. This is called individual variation, so our own linguistic fingerprint. We are all exposed to different linguistic experience, which shapes the way we speak and the way we use language. And today there are statistical methods allowing to distinguish one author from another author, one speaker from another speaker. There are also universal tendencies, which make the use of language different across different linguistic situations, like registers. So, as I said, we use language differently when we speak and when we write. Also, language is used differently across different genres. So when you read Harry Potter, it would read completely differently than an academic paper. Also, native users and non-native users of language use language differently. And translations and non-translations present a completely different, or maybe not a completely different, but slightly different language use. And the same case is interpretation, so spoken translation. Spoken translation, so interpretation, also uses language a little bit differently from the way that we communicate when non-interpreting. And today I would like to focus on the three latter aspects. So native versus non-native language use, translated versus non-translated, and interpreted versus non-interpreted. There are two branches of linguistics that handle this topic. One is translation studies, and within translation studies, we investigate translationese, so the language of translation, which can also be called third code, or the language of interpreting, which is interpretees. In applied linguistics, we investigate non-native language use, or learner language, or interlanguage. So the way people use language when they are speaking and using or writing not a foreign language, not their own language, but a foreign language. And now I'm bringing the two branches of linguistics together to investigate constrained communication. Constrained communication would be communication in all these situations when you have additional limitations to the way you speak. So when you are speaking your non-native language, it's an additional constraint for you, an additional burden that you have to tackle because you are not speaking your native tongue, and it might be a little bit more difficult for you. Now, when you are translating or when you are interpreting, there is an additional constraint or additional burden, if you will. You have to produce a message that has already been produced by somebody else. So in addition to handling two languages, so your native tongue and a foreign language, you also are dependent on the text that has already been created. And today we are going to look at constrained communication, which involves non-native language use when you speak a foreign language. And so you are subject to bilingual processing, to processing two languages. You juggle two languages at the same time, because even if you speak just a foreign language, your native language, native tongue is always there for you, and it's always you are always processing both. But non-native language use, so when you speak a foreign language, involves independent text production. We are not transferring anybody else's message. The message is your own. In the case of translation and interpreting, it's a dependent text production. So you do have a text that you rely on. And in addition, you are processing two languages. Sometimes you are even interpreting or translating into a foreign language. That would be extra difficult. Now, there are certain tendencies or roles that are called universals of constrained communication. And they say that translational communication and ordinary bilingual communication involve the use of two languages. And this fact may account for similar phenomena appearing in both types of communication. So because we are processing two languages when we speak a foreign language and when we translate, we can assume that the language that we use in these two situations can be similar. And now a little bit about my project. The name of the project is TRIPO, from translationese, interpretees, and foreignese, so the language of translation, the language of interpreting, and the language of foreign language use. And the aim of this project was to verify this hypothesis that we have just talked about. So to verify whether indeed interpreting, translation, and foreign language use have common linguistic features. And in this project, I'm investigating the debates that were held at the European Parliament and looking at the Polish to English translations and interpretations, and also speeches delivered in English by the Polish native speakers, so the Polish MEPs. I am comparing the following language varieties, so language types, if you will. Spoken and written, so two registers, the spoken register and the written register, and speeches delivered by native speakers of English. There will be British and Irish MEPs, speeches delivered by non-native speakers of English in English, that would be speeches delivered by Polish MEPs, and simultaneously interpreted speeches when Polish MEPs can't speak English and they use simultaneous interpreters to get their message across. And also I'm comparing this to speeches written in English by native English MEPs, speeches written in English by Polish MEPs, and speeches translated into English from Polish. So just to make it a little bit more visual, I am comparing the way that native English MEPs use language, the way that Polish MEPs use English, and the way simultaneous interpreters and translators at the European Parliament use English. At the European Parliament, the speeches are usually prepared beforehand, but it doesn't always happen this way. So an MEP can stand up and read out a speech that they prepared before, or they can just stand up and give a speech impromptu, so without that much preparation. And this speech is then at the same time interpreted into all the European Union official languages. And later on, after the plenary has ended, a verbatim report is made of this speech. So the speech is transcribed, edited a little bit, and then translated in all the official languages of the European Union. And I am investigating all these texts with a corpus method. Now, what is a corpus? A corpus is a collection of large number of machine-readable texts, which can be automatically analyzed. They can be analyzed with the use of a computer. The corpus-based approach, so this method, is based on analysis of large databases of real language examples stored on a computer. So the examples that I'm analyzing come from the European Parliament, and they are real-life examples. I haven't made them up. They come from the European Parliament plenary. And corpus linguistics draws insights from actual language use, so this also matches. And it enables, and this is very important, to trace patterns of language use, the regularities within language. And this is what we are interested in this presentation. The corpus is already available online. So the data set that I am analyzing is available online. I made it available via the European Parliament Translation and Interpreting Corpus. And now, what did I investigate? I looked into how diverse language is, so how lexis used within different texts is diverse, how formulaic the text is, so whether or not it uses a lot of formulaic expressions and pre-constructed phrases, and how ideas within a text are linked. So what's the cohesion in this text? So question one is whether the lexis is equally diverse in speeches delivered by native English MEPs, speeches delivered by Polish MEPs speaking English, and simultaneous interpretations and translations. Now, what's lexical diversity? It's the way that you use language, well, the lexical part of it, so the content words, and how diverse it is. If you look at the two squares, you can see that square number 1 is not as diverse as square number 2. Square number 1 has clusters and it doesn't have as many colors. And so it is less variable. And so square number 2 has the greater number of different squares and a text would have greater number of different words used in a text. And also, square number 2 represents more evenness. So the squares representing words in the text are used more evenly and make the text more varied. And also, square number 2 is less dispersed. So the squares in the second picture are less clustered and less repetitive, whereas the first square, which represents a more repetitive text, has many clusters and is thus more repetitive. So we are looking at lexical diversity, how words, content words, are diverse within a text, and how, for instance, repetitive a text is, and how many different words it uses. And when we were looking at lexical diversity, it turned out that native speeches have the highest lexical diversity, while non-native speeches, both spoken and written, and interpretations and translations are less lexically diverse, which means that interpretations and translations and non-native speeches and written non-native texts are slightly more repetitive, and they use smaller number of diverse words. They use the same words all the time, so to say. So they are less lexically diverse. Now, question 2, is the language used by MEPs from the G countries and simultaneous interpreters and translators more formulaic? Now, first, let's get back to formulaic language. Formulaic expressions are semi-pre-constructed phrases that constitute single choices, even though they might appear to be analyzable into segments. So you are using a couple of words, but your brain actually retrieves them all together. And because the brain retrieves these formulaic expressions, so expressions that are pre-constructed, like idioms, for instance, altogether, these formulaic expressions seem to liberate cognitive resources. So when you use these pre-constructed phrases, you don't make such a big effort when speaking, because everything is already stored in your brain, and your brain retrieves it. You don't have to think about it that much. It's automatic. And so it's believed that formulaic expressions are used in greater proportion in those situations which are more difficult, so require more processing effort, like, for instance, simultaneous interpreting or speaking a foreign language. And I investigated the use of formulaic language by looking at bigrams. And bigrams are formulae of language consisting of two elements, like, for example, or European Union, or think that, or member states, or debate on. So these are formulae that I looked into. And it turned out that interpreters and translators indeed do use more formulae in their text. And that also holds true for non-native speakers. And native speakers use the formulaic language the least. Why? Because when you speak your native tongue, you don't put so much effort into speaking as when you are speaking a foreign language or interpreting or translating, because speaking a foreign language and interpreting and translating involves using two languages at the same time. Now, question 3. Are there more cohesive links between ideas in speeches delivered by native English MEPs, speeches by Polish MEPs delivered in English, and in simultaneous interpretations and translations of Polish speeches into English? And now, what are cohesive links? Cohesive links are usually marked with cohesive devices. So these are links between ideas that are signaled with such words like on the other hand, however, therefore, because, nevertheless, etc., etc. So I was calculating how many times these cohesive devices appeared in the text. And it turns out that interpretations and translations use cohesive devices most frequently. The number of cohesive devices is also greater in non-native speeches than in native speeches. So when you're using your language, your mother tongue, you're not linking your ideas as explicitly as non-native speakers, translators, and interpreters do. This is most probably because when you speak a foreign language, interpret and translate, you want to be better understood. You're not so sure about your linguistic competence sometimes, and you just want to make sure that the message that you have to say is well understood. And the same case is with interpreters, or maybe not the same, but it is similar. They want to make sure that whatever was the original message is well understood by the target recipients. Okay, so now how do we use language when we juggle more than one? Well, there are probably more than just this, but what I have discovered is that the lexis is less diverse. We use formulaic expressions more. And also we use greater number of cohesive devices to link our ideas in a better way. The effect is bigger even when we translate and interpret into foreign language, because you then process two languages, so the source language and the target language, and also you are speaking a foreign language at the same time. Okay, I hope this was interesting from you. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you at the Faculty of English.